der soll heißen KdF-Wagen.
Wir haben dem Konstrukteur Dr. Porsche die denkbar größten Möglichkeiten verschafft, damit er frei von jeder Einengung seine Konstruktion von höchster Qualität vollenden und sie in einem beispiellosen Verfahren erproben konnte. Ohne Rücksicht auf die sonstigen Schwierigkeiten haben wir auf dieser Grundlage unsere Arbeiten mit dem Ziele begonnen, Ende 1939 den ersten Volkswagen rollen zu lassen.
Dr. Porsche was indeed a brilliant technical designer. Born in 1875, it wasn't long until his technical excellence started to show. At the age of 19, he installed an electricity system in his father's house. Porsche moved his attentions towards cars, and from an early age held a desire to produce a cheap, affordable car that everyone could own. The 1890 Porsche Lohner chaise, powered by 2 electric motors in the front hubs, was the first of his automobile designs. Motoring in Germany was restricted to the rich. Porsche was from a working class background. His sympathies laid much more with the workers than with the financiers of the German car industry. He spent 18 years at Austro-Daimler in senior management, before resigning in 1923 after boardroom rows about cuts in the labor force. At the age of 55, Ferdinand Porsche formed his own design company. On a speculative basis, the Type 12 was produced, a small-sized car suited to the economic depression. Baron von Volkenheim, head of NSU, recruited Porsche to produce a car suited to the hard economic climate. The Type 32 was born. The engine, Beetle-like, 1470cc and air-cooled, proved good for speeds of up to 75 miles per hour. The body was designed by Erwin Kommender. However, NSU, under contractual obligations to Fiat, had to agree never to produce cars under their own name again. Porsche found himself without sponsorship for his Volksauto project. At the same time, Adolf Hitler had taken power. In order to get the country mobile, Hitler placed the production of a Volksauto high on his priority list. Jakob Werlin, an old friend of Porsche's, had heard about the Type 32, and in order to earn favor with the Führer, arranged a meeting with the two parties. Porsche was taken to the Kaiserhof Hotel in Berlin to meet Hitler and the Auto Union directors. Already during the development of the Zundap and NSU, my father had handed in his exposé about the building of a small car for Germany.
Ministerium in Berlin, im Reichsverkehrsministerium, ein Exposé abgegeben.
He wanted this car to be built as a cooperation between the whole industry.
Gemeinsam mit der gesamten Industrie zu bauen. Und dieser Gedanke wurde von Hitler aufgegriffen.
Hitler picked up this idea.
Ob nun Hitler vorher schon die Idee hatte.
If he got this idea before or after reading the exposé, no one can tell. Anyway, at the car exhibition of 1934, he mentioned Volkswagen for the first time.
Bei der Automobilausstellung das erste Mal von einem Volkswagen gesprochen.
At the meeting, Hitler showed an impressive knowledge of cars, producing rough sketches and a 5-point plan for his version of the people's car. Hitler persuaded the RDA, the German car manufacturers' trade organization, to sponsor Porsche and aid the development of the Volksauto. Jealous of his innovative designs, the major car manufacturers boycotted Porsche, forcing him to design and build on his own premises in Stuttgart. By the end of 1935, 2 cars were testing in the Black Forest. The prototypes Type 60s covered over 50,000 miles. Porsche was granted a further 12 months development period, mainly to work on engine trials. 2 cars were built, a V1 sedan by a coach builder Reuter and a V2 cabriolet by Drauss. Later, 3 more were commissioned, built by Daimler-Benz. Finished in early 1936, the VW3 sent out a clear signal to the major manufacturers that Hitler was not to be disobeyed. The VW3 was given to the RDA for extensive testing. The car covered 400 miles a day over the Alps, through the Black Forest and across the new autobahns. 50,000 miles were clocked during the trial periods. Franz Reimspeis, a new member of the Porsche design team, suggested a 4-cylinder engine instead of 2. This would be as economical to produce as the 2-cylinder, but would give far better results. Hitler funded the project from May 1937 through his German Labour Front, DAF. The Society for the Development of German Volkswagen was established, and a further 500,000 Reichsmarks were put into the development of prototypes. The Series 30 were manufactured by Daimler-Benz. 200 SS soldiers were commandeered to test drive the cars. Porsche's son, Ferry, oversaw the project. The final styling was given to Erwin Kommender. 44 Series 38 cars were constructed for final testing.
Ich freue mich, dass es der Fähigkeit eines glänzenden Konstrukteurs und der Mitarbeiter des Stabes gelungen ist, die Vorentwürfe für den deutschen Volkswagen fertigzustellen, um die ersten Exemplare ab Mitte dieses Jahres endlich erproben zu können. Unsere Ingenieure und Arbeiter können stolz sein, solche Wagen zu bauen. Möge der Deutsche stolz genug sein, sie ihrer auch zu bedienen.
Dies ist der älteste noch erhaltene Volkswagen.
This is the oldest VW in existence with the number 3 chassis. This car was driven by Porsche as a company car and has done 600,000 kilometers since.
Mittlerweile hinter sich gebracht. Er ist bis Kriegsende, bis 1944 mit normalem Motor.
At the end of the war, it was stripped down to save it from the hands of the Allies. It was put back together in 1948.
In Deutschland wurde er umgerüstet auf Holzgasbetrieb. Nach dem Krieg, oder besser gesagt bei Kriegsende, wurde er in seine Einzelteile zerlegt, um ihm den Zugriff...
It has been in the possession of the Volkswagen factory since 1952. It still runs like a new car.
Er ist im Besitz des Volkswagenwerks seit 1952 und bewegt sich heute...
We often use it for veteran rallies, where it's always the main attraction.
Wenn wir Veteranenfahrten machen, dann ist dieses Auto natürlich die Attraktion.
Das ging deswegen über, weil der Reichsverband...
The RDA approached the Führer and offered to build the car if they got a 200 Deutschmark subsidy.
200 Mark Subvention pro Wagen kriegen. Und da gab es den Kurzschluss beim Hitler, der es gesagt hat...
This is the point when Hitler blew his top and said, 200 Deutschmarks for 1 million cars, that's going to be 200 million Deutschmarks. Is there no more effective way to invest this money rather than a once-paid subsidy?
Es war kein völlig unüberlegter Vorschlag.
This wasn't a spontaneous idea, but an expression of belief that for this amount of money, you could build a factory in which cars could be manufactured for the price requested by the Führer.
Es kam dann zuerst einmal die Wahl,
So the first question was,
sollte eigentlich
where should the factory be
ein
built?
solches Werk hingebaut
In
werden?
Hitler's opinion, it should be located in the center of Germany.
Im Dritten Reich Hitlers Meinung in Mitteldeutschland. Es war auch klar, dass es an einer
Of course, it had to be close to the railway line, a canal or motorway.
Kanal liegen müsste, womöglich an der Autobahn. Und da
It was obvious that Wolfsburg would be an ideal location.
Irgendwie ein Idealplatz sein könnte. Wobei er natürlich ein Idealplatz war für das Mitteldeutschland und die Nähe der drei Dinge.
Hitler chose the village of Fallersleben on the banks of the Mittelland Canal, located on the estate of 14th century Schloss Wolfsburg. On the 26th of May 1938, Hitler dedicated the factory cornerstone in a grand Nazi opening.
Aber nicht unbedingt ein Idealplatz für die
But it
Errichtung
wasn't the
einer
ideal place to build up a big new
großen
industry.
Denn
There were no
normalerweise
laborers,
weiß
no
man, dass
power
man
supply
sowas
and no raw materials.
dort errichten sollte, wo man die Arbeitskräfte hat, die Energie hat oder wenigstens den Rohstoff hat. Aber alle drei Dinge gab es in Wolfsburg nicht.
Wolfsburg lacked all of these three important factors. The day of laying the foundation stone was already fixed, and with 3 Volkswagens, similar in design to future productions, we drove to Braunschweig.
Den späteren Serienfahrzeugen, ähnlichen Fahrzeugen, fuhren wir zur Grundsteinlegung nach Braunschweig. Mit einem Sonderzug kam Adolf Hitler und sein ganzes Gefolge. Alles war in Uniform.
Adolf Hitler and his entourage all marched up in uniform. I felt slightly embarrassed because my father and I were the only two not in uniform. We were even more surprised by the new name Hitler had given the Volkswagen.
Von der neuen Bezeichnung dieses Automobils.
Er soll heißen KdF-Wagen.
It shall be named KdF Wagen. Dr. Porsche has designed a saloon, an open top, and a convertible, which with a fuel consumption of 6 to 7 liters and cruising speed of 100 kilometers per hour will cost only 990 Deutschmarks.
Dr. Porsche konstruierte eine Limousine, einen offenen Wagen und eine Cabrio-Limousine, die bei 6 bis 7 Liter Brennstoffverbrauch und 100 Kilometer Autobahngeschwindigkeit nur 990 Mark kosten werden.
Nach den Reden, die also da geschwungen wurden, habe ich dann Hitler an meiner Seite im Cabrio.
After the speeches were held, I had to drive Hitler in the cabriolet to the train station. Although I drove slowly, Hitler asked me to drive more slow. I drove all the way to the station in first gear. He felt enthusiastic about the car and ride.
Von dem Fahrzeug und von der Fahrt.
Der Käfer Cabriolet, Baujahr 1938, den Sie im Volkswagen Museum gesehen haben, ist
The 1938 convertible in the museum is a present to Hitler from Volkswagen for his 50th birthday.
Die wenigsten Leute wissen, dass Adolf Hitler überhaupt kein Führerschein
Only a few people know that he never held a driving license. He was chauffeured everywhere.
hingebracht. Und zu seinem 50. Geburtstag bekam er dieses Fahrzeug von entweder dem Volkswagenwerk oder von der deutschen Industrie als Geburtstagsgeschenk. Es wurde auf den Obersalzberg bei Berchtesgaden in die Garage gestellt und 1945, als
He was stored in a garage until 1945 when the Americans discovered it.
entdeckten sie in der Garage dieses Fahrzeug. Soweit mir bekannt ist, haben von 1945 bis 1900...
As far as I know, the car had 8 owners between 1945 and 1955.
Zuletzt hatte das Fahrzeug ein Uhrmacher aus Tegernsee gefahren. Der ist dann 1955 bei der Firma Mahak
The last one was a watchmaker who part-exchanged it in Munich.
Keiner wusste offiziell von dem Wert des Fahrzeugs und so stand es mehrere Jahre lang in der Ecke, bis dann das Volkswagenwerk von der Sache Wind bekam und dieses Fahrzeug der Firma Maag München abkaufte. Es wurde dann restauriert nach dem damaligen...
No one had a clue about its value. When Volkswagen found out, they purchased it and restored it to its present-day condition, as seen in the museum.
Veranstaltung ist eine größere Veranstaltung so, oder im In- oder im Ausland, können Sie das Fahrzeug ab und zu noch mal besichtigen. Wir hatten das Fahrzeug...
VW used it on several rallies, and even today it runs like new.
Hier in Bad Camberg, es hat also die
I had it here on my second meeting in 1983.
und läuft wie eine Nähmaschine, also wirklich fantastisch. So, das war's also von dem...
That's all about Hitler's convertible.
wo manche Leute
I don't know why some people don't want to talk about it.
Der erste Bauabschnitt des Volkswagen-Werkes geht seiner Vollendung entgegen. Auf dem riesigen Raum von 3 Quadratkilometern sind in knapp 3/4 Jahren mächtige Bauten entstanden. An der Fertigstellung der Bauten sind über 5000 Arbeiter, darunter einige tausend italienische und einige hundert holländische Arbeitskameraden beteiligt. Den Arbeitern des Volkswagen-Werkes werden die schönsten Pausenräume, Duschanlagen und Sportplätze zur Verfügung stehen, sodass hier nicht nur die technischen Anlagen, sondern auch die soziale Betreuung der Belegschaft einzigartig in der Welt sein werden.
The Volkswagen will be known as the KdF Wagen, strength through joy, and the town of Wolfsburg will be called KdF-Stadt. The German people could purchase their KdF Wagen by collecting stamps on a card. The stamps were purchased at 5 Reichsmarks each.
Auto ist ein Original KdF-Wagen.
This is an original KdF Wagen. KdF, as an organization, were meant to take care of the selling and distribution of the car in the Third Reich.
Ein Prototyp, den Professor Porsche 1938.
This developed from Porsche's prototypes of 1938, which was to be sold in Germany for 990 Reichsmark.
Das Design dieses Fahrzeugs.
The design of the car is one of Europe's first to be designed through a wind tunnel. This method was first used in the USA. Porsche thought his car should also incorporate this design element.
Die Windkanalform kam damals gerade in den USA auf und Professor Porsche war der Meinung, dass der Volkswagen eben auch nun diese Windkanalform haben sollte. Aber diese Form hat natürlich auch praktische
The
Gründe.
design is also very practical. The car was meant to be user-friendly and easy to service, and of course, it's easier to wash a rounded car rather than a car with lots of corners.
CW-Werte, und das ist ja das, was heute für Automobile wichtig ist, liegen bei diesem
The
Volkswagen
CW, something that's very important in today's manufacturing, was 0.48, which wasn't at all bad for the time.
Die grundsätzlichen Designelemente, die Porsche
The basic design elements which Porsche came up with in 1938 were all taken up in the final production.
gebaut wird, komplett übernommen.
Auch ausländische Journalisten wurden zu überzeugten Freunden des KdF-Wagens. Man staunte über den geringen Benzinverbrauch von nur 6,5 Litern, die große Anfangsbeschleunigung auf 60 Stundenkilometer innerhalb von 14 Sekunden, die hervorragende Straßenlage und das Vierganggetriebe.
Compliment. Très confortable. C'est une trouvaille et nous espérons vraiment qu'elle aura grand succès.
Meinen KdF-Wagen haben Sie ja bereits in Wolfsburg.
My KdF wagon is in the Wolfsburg Museum. The vehicle was acquired by pure accident.
Und zwar durch einen, wie man sagt, in Deutsch blöden Zufall. Ich las samstags in einer Zeitung, sah ich ein Bild.
One Saturday, I saw a picture of the car in our local newspaper.
Also ein Probefahrtkennzeichen. Montags rief ich darauf hin.
The following Monday, I rang the vehicle registration department in Lindbergh, who gave me the name of the owner.
Namen von dem Halter, von dem roten Schild. Ich setze mich mit ihm in Verbindung und er sagt mir, dass das Fahrzeug in einer Scheune gefunden wurde.
I contacted the owner, who told me he wasn't interested in a sale. He'd found the car in a barn and was now storing it at his place.
Daraufhin fuhr ich 14 Tage später in den betreffenden Ort, in der Nähe von Heilbronn, ging in eine Gaststätte.
2 weeks later, I drove to the mentioned town and found out where the gentleman lived. Within half an hour, we made a deal, and I brought the car here to Camberg.
Daraufhin gab er mir die Adresse. Ich ging zu dem Mann hin und wurde binnen einer halben Stunde einig. Und am nächsten Tag holte ich mir dann den KdF hier nach Camberg. Ich zerlegte ihn komplett.
I stripped it down completely and discovered that it must have been in a bad accident, as the frame and the axles were bent. It was only provisionally repaired by the German forces just to keep it running.
Repariert so, dass er einigermaßen noch spurte. Ich hatte ungefähr 2 Jahre gebraucht, bis ich das Fahrzeug
It took me nearly
so
2
weit
years
hatte,
to restore it to the condition you see it in now. This advertising film of the 30s promises the car for the people. Over 300,000 Germans signed up for the KdF wagon. None ever received their car. On the 1st of September 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. Production at Wolfsburg turned over to military manufacturing. The factory was still not complete by 1940. Only 210 KdF wagons had been built. These were distributed amongst high-ranking Nazis. By 1944, the People's Car had reached a production total of 630. In 1938, Franz Reimspeis designed a cross-country vehicle based on the KdF floor plan. After testing, Ferry Porsche was given the task of improving the design. His concept was the Kubelwagen. Production started on the 21st of December 1940. By the end of World War II, over 50,000 had been built in the Wolfsburg plant. The Kubelwagen featured a KdF chassis with a standard 985cc 22.5 horsepower engine. In June 1940, Ferdinand Porsche was employed by the Army to design and construct an amphibious vehicle. The resulting Schwimmwagen was a tub-like body on a Volkswagen base. These cars could swim and had four-wheel drive. Large areas of Germany were badly destroyed by the successful Allied bombing raids. The defeated German people couldn't imagine that cars would ever be driven again on their war-torn streets. The Volkswagen factories suffered too. About 2/3 had been reduced to rubble. The plant was liberated by the US Army in April 1945. The German guards had fled, and the foreign slave labor force were left to run riot. The British took control of the factory in the summer of 1945. Major Ivan Hurst was the plant's commanding officer.
Well, I went to Wolfsburg first in August 1945. The war was over in Europe in May. I was a major in Remy, seconded to military government. I got acting lieutenant colonel, but not the actual, didn't wear the rank of lieutenant colonel. I was there as a military officer for some 15 months when I became a civilian officer in the same post. Then military government, or the higher echelon known as Control Commission. Stayed there until autumn '49. My initial brief was virtually zero, just to go to Wolfsburg and take charge of a factory, a derelict factory. There was already some activity there. What should we call them, the hardcore of Germans who had left over from the war, still there, were working as contractors to the British Army, repairing all classes of motor vehicle for transportation in Germany over the first winter of the occupation. The railways were not functioning very well, and so road transport was considered of great importance. The army team there had allowed the Germans to assemble a few of the Kubelwagen, the German Jeep type Volkswagen, from parts that were lying around, left over from the wartime program. And the officer in charge at Army headquarters in Germany, one Michael McEvoy, a colonel, full colonel, had been in Germany in 1938 and had been at the motor show in Berlin that year and had ridden in one of the pre-production Beetles, KdF wagon as they were then called. And it was he who had the bright idea that the British in Germany would require a light vehicle. All the British had, all we had, were one-ton trucks and a few clapped-out light utility vehicles. It was clear, of course, that if we could get cars made in Germany from German materials by Germans, this wouldn't cost the British taxpayer anything. At the end of the war, there was no hope of getting funds for the army. A used Beetle from the limited wartime production was at the factory. Don't know who it belonged to, but we sprayed it khaki green colour, sent it up to Army headquarters as a demonstrator, and were rather surprised to get an order for 20,000. So that was the signal to go ahead. The original idea had been to produce a Volkswagen, the Jeep-type vehicle, but the bodies for that had been made in Berlin, now Russian sector of Berlin, in 1945, and the factory there anyhow had been bombed and fought over and was a ruin, so there were no bodies to be had from there. Therefore, production of Volkswagen at Wolfsburg all hinged on whether it would be possible to make the Beetle. The factory was about 2/3 of the floor space was down, roof down. Most of the machine tools were still around. They'd been moved into cellars against possible bombing, which of course in the event did happen. The big presses were there, and the press tools were there. So with the German executives who had remained, we did a quick survey and decided it would be possible to produce a Beetle, provided that materials were available. At that time, of course, the steel mills were not operating properly. Materials of all kinds were rationed by military government. We got an allocation of steel, but the steel mills couldn't deliver sheets big enough, and the first Beetles were produced with a welded seam across the roof. The middle management, by and large, were keen to see the Volkswagen project through and to get cars made. And, of course, they were keen to stay in a job. The production operatives didn't exist. During the war, there had been Russian prisoners of war and what our German friends nowadays call guest workers from various countries, Poland, Holland, and so on. The foreigners had all gone. The Russians, of course, had gone back. So I arranged with manpower colleagues to offer work at the Wolfsburg factory to German armed forces personnel coming out of British prisoner of war camps. So we had a workforce of ex-German army and air force, still wearing uniform, many of them. They were employed, of course, by the factories, ordinary civilian workers. They had to be housed in hutted camps, which had been used during the war for the foreign workers there. Feeding was a problem, as the German rations were bare minimal. The factory had a farm which was put to work to produce some food. We even ploughed the factory front and sowed grain there.
46, den Wiederbeginn im neu getauften Wolfsburg.
Zu Fallersleben werden wieder Wagen am laufenden Band hergestellt. Rund 18.000 Arbeitskräfte sind in dem Werk und seinen Nebenbetrieben beschäftigt. Aufträge und Rohstoffe sind für lange Zeit gesichert. Die Wagen werden durch die Militärbehörden zunächst an Dienststellen der Besatzungsmacht und lebenswichtige deutsche Betriebe verteilt.
Production of the Beetle really got going on a small scale, of course, but this was a time when no other manufacturer in Germany was producing cars at all. First got going in March 1946. at a rate of 1,000 cars a month, which was the limit set by the availability of materials. Until about mid-47, virtually the entire production was going to the Allies, to the British, the Americans, and the French in West Germany. However, 1947 was a time of complete change of the political climate. The Iron Curtain had come down, the Berlin airlift was on.
Vom britischen Flugplatz Wunsdorf bei Hannover werden Volkswagen nach Berlin geflogen. Frisch aus dem Werk geht es direkt in den Flugzeugbau.
It was clear that the company might have a future. It had been intended to dismantle the factory as surplus to the cap placed on German industry at the end of the war. Because of the Allied requirement, there was a 4-year reprieve from that dismantling. About the same time as the Allied requirement was satisfied, by and large, London woke up to the fact that imports of grain and other foodstuffs into West Germany, into the British zone in particular, were being paid for by the British government with US dollars. This was the time of Stafford Cripps, of course, and economic stringency at home. And as a result, all of us on the industry side in Germany got instructions to push German companies into exporting. An agency was set up jointly with the Americans, whereby German goods were sold to other countries for US dollars, which then went to pay for food imports. Holland was the first country to take the Beetle, followed by Belgium, Denmark, Switzerland. About the same time, as there was production by this time had risen to about 2,500 cars a month, there were cars also available to go to supply the pent-up demand of the German civilian economy. Cars began to go to the Germans. Dealerships were opened. And also at that time, the German currency was reformed. The Deutsche Mark came in. And overnight, it was like flowers in the desert blooming after a rain. Stuff came into the shops, whereas the day before there'd been nothing in the shops. And the economy started to move again. That was where Volkswagen began to take off. There was a very serious interest by the Australian government. And they sent a couple of fellows from Australia to stay and study the plant. Their interest was that they had found themselves cut off in the war in the Pacific from the industrial might required for defense, and they wished to build up an Australian motor industry. But when they realized that the Volkswagen was not going to be available for 4 years because it was required for the Allies during that period, they couldn't wait. They lost interest. Ford, there was some lobbying in 1948 whereby Ford might have taken over the company or bid for it. Henry Ford himself was visiting his plant at Cologne, and was going to come up to Wolfsburg. When he was shown where it was on the map, he said, this is only a couple of miles away from the Russian own boundary. No political hot potato, won't touch it. There has also been a suggestion that routes in Britain were interested. I have no real knowledge of any serious interest there. They had received a Volkswagen at their Humber subsidiary to evaluate and report on as part of a general study of German products that was going on just after the war. And this was examined by people, I think, steeped in the tradition of cast iron engines and beam axles, and they reported rather badly on the Volkswagen. That has been suggested in the press that Roots condemned the project, but it was, I think, just merely a technical study, evaluation, which, in my view, went wrong. Mid-47, everything was changing. Political climate, civilian deliveries in Germany, export deliveries. The Allied requirement largely satisfied. The British board, responsible for the factory, came to realize that the company had a future. And we decided to stiffen the management at the top. We looked around, asked around to the German Motor Industry Federation and to personal contacts, and found nobody who was prepared to take on the job. They were not certain that there was a future. One day, a colleague in Hamburg phoned and said that there was a motor industry man there kicking his heels, unemployed. Would I like to see him? She turned out to be one Heinz Nordhoff, who had been with Opel, an engineer, and he was clearly a man of high caliber. I decided that he was the man for the job, arranged for him to meet my chief, who was chairman of the board. He went up to our headquarters, interviewed by Charles Ratcliffe, my chief, and the board appointed him effective 1st January 1948. And from then on, we gave them Nordhoff and his team their full reign. The management that we had put in, incidentally, Nordhoff kept in the job. He brought in one or two more people, not all of whom stayed. The company was handed over to the Germans, to be precise, to the government of Lower Saxony, in the autumn of 1949, and we withdrew.
Heinrich Nordhoff inspires the workers, and shortly after his appointment, the 20,000th Beetle rolls off the production line. The convertible Beetle, cancelled under the KdF program, was revived in 1949 by two independent German coach builders. two-seater Hebmuller cabriolet, which was built between 1948 to 1950, producing a total of 696 cars.
Hier sehen Sie ein zweisitziges Hebmüller Cabriolet, das in den Jahren 48 bis 1950 in einer Stückzahl von 696 gebaut wurden. Dieses Exemplar hier.
This one is the 13th, one of the oldest in existence. I've completely restored the car with a new chassis and with cable-pulled brakes instead of hydraulic brakes. The Hebmuller company had to stop building because their factory burnt down and they weren't properly insured.
Ein neues Chassis drunter. Und zwar hatte ich den Wagen original, so habe ich es auch wieder restauriert, mit Seilzugbremsen, also kein Öldruck. Von den 696 Hebmüllern gibt es weltweit...
Of the 696 Hebmullers built, there are still 220 around today, a remarkable third of all ever built.
Überlebt. Sie wurden damals auch mit 25...
They also had a 25 horsepower 1200 cc engine.
Und 1200 CCM.
The Beetle and Volkswagen, under the pioneering leadership of Nordhoff, set out to help put Germany on the path to economic recovery. Beetles were mass-produced at Wolfsburg by the late 1940s, but some assembly methods were still done by hand and rather crude. Ben Pon established an export market by contracting an order of 56 sedans for Holland. '49 saw the first export models. Chrome trim distinguishes the car. Hubcaps are fitted. The bonnet handle is fixed, the lid being released from inside. The horn is positioned beneath the front left-hand wing, behind one of the circular grills. Major Ivan Hurst reflects on the car's success.
Cars were the right size, a compact as the Americans would call it. It was not a cheap car to produce. It had a separate chassis frame. It wasn't what we would now call a monocoque construction, as all cars are. It was air-cooled, rather noisy. But its shape was distinctive. It became a cult car. But I think its success really lies in quality. Quality control was improved in the early years after the war. And the car by the 1950s was of high quality, good paint, good chrome, good mechanicals, but perhaps above all, we had already instilled on the Germans the need for satisfactory, or better than satisfactory, after-sales service. After all, we in the army had suffered from non-availability of parts during the war, and one of the prime objectives on our part was to make sure that there were spares available and special tools for servicing the car and factory-trained mechanics available. The Germans latched on to that soon after the war, and they developed a service organization second to none. talking to Nordhoff one day, I remember him saying to me, summed up my feeling, but he put it into a few words, was that we're not making motor cars, we're making transportation. That's what it was.
From Ferdinand Porsche's earliest visions of his people's car, aided by Hitler's requirement for cheap mass transportation, the KdF wagon remarkably survived the ravages of World War II. A car that was rejected by the victorious Allies as having insufficient commercial potential, the Volkswagen has thrived to undoubtedly become car of the century.
KdF